Coordinator for the Maine State Police, and we're here today with Specialist Seth Allen and Highway Safety Coordinator Jamie Dion. And we're here to talk to you guys about safety checkpoints in Maine, also known as OUI checkpoints. So why don't you introduce yourself, Seth?
I'm Specialist Seth Allen. I'm the impaired driving specialist with the State Police in the Traffic Safety Division.
I'm Highway Safety Coordinator Jamie Dion with Bureau of Highway Safety and the Impaired Driving Programs.
Excellent. Now, we had posted the question to Facebook to let you guys ask some questions, and Peter asked us, what are the rules about citizens walking up to one of these checkpoints?
They're open. We're public servants. As long as they're not obstructing, they can observe a checkpoint from a safe location as long as they're not obstructing a roadway or our investigations.
Excellent. And another question that we had is we often will notify the public as to the fact that we're having a checkpoint. Why is it that we do that?
We're required to by law. We have to announce to the public general location and when we're conducting checkpoints.
And what's some of the rationale behind that? Because there's been some conversation on our page about the reasoning behind that. Can you guys speak to?
I think the whole goal is to prevent impaired driving. So if folks see that it's advertised and it's going to be in their town, the goal is for them either to find a safe ride home or to stay at home and partake in activities at home. Not to say that we're telling the exact location of the checkpoint, but there may be other law enforcement officers in cars, around the checkpoint where folks would, go around. So there is a contingency plan for that if folks try to elude the checkpoint, but the whole goal is to prevent the impaired driving in the first place.
Excellent. Another question, what are you checking for at the checkpoints? What are signs of impairment and whatnot?
First, if it's an OUI alcohol, we're checking for the odor of intoxicants within the vehicle, which could include cannabis, drug paraphernalia, anything like that could be somebody driving impaired. If we do suspect impairment, we pull them off the roadway as to not obstruct the other cars that are passing through and being checked. And we'll conduct a more thorough investigation, which is essentially a traffic stop. Everything we do on a regular traffic stop. So checking for impairment, doing field sobriety. If they're impaired, arresting the subject. If not, we send them back on their way. They'll pull back into traffic and leave safely.
Some people were asking about how do you go about detecting intoxicants that are not alcohol? We know how field sobriety often works, but can you speak on that?
So we still conduct the same field sobriety testing, standardized field sobriety, horizontal gaze, nystagmus, the walk and turn and one leg stand. We have a significant number of officers in the state that are what we call ARIDE trained, advanced roadside impaired driving. It's a basic introduction to drugs that impair, and they see the signs and symptoms of drug use. And then we have a fairly large number in the state of drug recognition experts. And if somebody's arrested for OUI and it's not alcohol, they'll conduct an evaluation, look at physiology, signs and symptoms, and determine first if the person is impaired, and second, which of the 7 drug categories they're impaired by, if they are impaired.
Excellent. Someone was asking about whether or not these checkpoints are entrapment. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I'll defer that one to you.
So there's a 1990 case out of Michigan. The Supreme Court ruled that it falls under reasonable search and seizure, and they've determined that we can conduct the checkpoints given some specific guidelines, one of which is advertising that we are doing it. So the Supreme Court is allowing us to do them until we have another case law come out determining if we can or can't. So far, there hasn't been any.
Drew is asking, what is the best way to tell that someone is impaired?
So it's a totality. It's not one specific thing. So if they pull up, we check for signs of impairment and pull them off into secondary if we believe they are, depending on what they say, how they're reacting within the car, and then field sobriety testing. Field sobriety testing is just checking for impairment. It doesn't go to one specific category. It's just impairment in general.
Excellent. And we're also looking to you guys to ask us some questions while we are live. And did you want to talk any more about the dangers of impaired driving, especially during the holidays?
So the holidays are usually when we see a spike in impaired driving fatalities and impaired driving crashes, just because of the nature of the time of the year. There's a lot of holiday parties. There's a lot of events that revolve around the holidays. So we do have grant programs for law enforcement through the Bureau of Highway Safety and through the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, where we give funds to law enforcement agencies to do extra patrols during those times. These are all overtime patrols for officers to go out. It starts December 13th and goes all the way through January 1st. Some of you may have heard of the Drive Sober, Get Pulled Over slogan. That is the campaign that's currently going on right now. The checkpoints are usually funded. A lot of the checkpoints are funded through those grants. So you'll see checkpoints throughout the state, especially during this time of year, during this holiday campaign. Every agency that does these checkpoints, we require them to have a policy, and the policy has to be in line with state and federal laws and case law to ensure that, one, we're protecting the rights of the citizens, but also keeping everybody safe on the road.
Excellent. Michael is asking, do we base the location of the checkpoints on any particular nexus or metrics?
Yes, we do actually. We do quite a bit of data analysis, and we do have some specialty impaired driving enforcement teams in various counties throughout the state, and the state police have what we call the SPIDER team, the State Police Impaired Driving Reduction Enforcement Team. These are specialty teams. These teams and the Bureau of Highway Safety review data statewide. We look at impaired driving crashes, where they're happening. We look at the sources of impairment. So we're looking at drinking establishments. We're looking at other OUI data trends as far as where the OUIs are happening, where these people are driving impaired. But the biggest thing we look at is crash and crash data. And I mean, it's various, it's spotty throughout the state, but when you look at the data, it's pretty adamant, pretty apparent where the problems are. And we focus around those problem areas. A lot of people tell us, well, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Well, if that's where the problem is, that's where we're going to go, and that's where law enforcement is going to go. So that's where we tend to funnel the funds to, is those areas.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, Michael, for your question. Some frequently asked questions that we get is, can I get an OUI after smoking marijuana?
Yes, you can. There's no specific per se limit for nanograms in the state of Maine. That's when a drug recognition expert comes in, does the evaluation, and if the person is impaired, they can be charged with OUI drugs. That's not to say just because they've smoked marijuana, they're impaired. We do have to have the indicators of impairment as well. So it's like medications. That's probably the next question. People can be impaired by a prescription medication, and that's when it's important to consult with your doctor when you're given a prescription. Read the bottle. A lot of medications say to not operate heavy machinery. That includes a car, so they can be impaired by it, and especially if it says not to mix with alcohol. A little bit of alcohol in prescription medication leads to impairment fairly often, and it's not the intentional violator that is that person. It's usually just your day-to-day employee who they have a drink after work and it impairs them with their medications.
All right, and it looks like we're getting a couple of repeat. We have talked about why we announce our checkpoints, and part of it is it's due to part of the requirements for being able to have them is letting people know in advance. If you feel like we aren't addressing one of your questions or you may have missed it, the video will be posted in its entirety once we are done. Can you get an OUI when your car is parked?
It depends. We do have to have operation or attempt to operate, and we have specific case laws in Maine pertaining to certain circumstances. You could, if the car is parked, and it depends on the circumstance, because we also have case law where a parked car wasn't ruled operation or attempting to operate. So I can't answer that a yes or a no. It's dependent on the circumstances.
Excellent. And let's see. Gwen is asking if it's a red flag for you if a driver opts to turn their car around rather than go through the checkpoint.
So we obviously want to investigate why they did. We have what we call chase cars set up. It's just cars that are in line with the traffic flow for that specific direction. So they'll go, if they see poor operation on that vehicle, they'll make a traffic stop, and if the driver's impaired, they'll bring him back to the checkpoint. We have a roadside testing vehicle which has an intoxilizer in it. So they'll bring them back if they perform poorly on field sobriety and complete their OUI investigation.
Excellent. All right, are there any other frequently asked questions that you guys receive that you'd like to take the time to address, or anything you feel like we might be missing? And keep chiming in with those questions. They're great. Thank you, Gwen.
We don't have any questions.
All right. During the holidays, do you find that the amount of impairment goes up? And if so, is it more people going out or people visiting?
It's both. A lot of people go out to restaurants, bars, and consume more than they have, long weekends and such, and then holiday parties as well. We get a lot of people who have been out consuming some sort of intoxicant at parties, and then they're driving home. They give it a little bit of time, sometimes not enough, and that's when we run into the impairment from people's houses, parties, and such.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the whole goal here is voluntary compliance to ensure that people are safe on the roads and not driving impaired on the roads. It's not to go out and just bus people, because we're doing a checkpoint. The goal is to have folks, either find alternative transportation or stay home when they're partaking in these type of activities. But if they are out there, we do want to find them. And law enforcement wants to take them off the road. So it's a big piece of all of our programs is, we're obviously looking to reduce crashes, but the ultimate goal is to prevent them.
Right. Are there any misconceptions that you feel that people have about how intoxicated they are when they're out?
We run into a lot of people who don't think they're as impaired as they are because they have given it time. So if they get really intoxicated when they're out, they'll give it some time. They're not as impaired as they were, however, they're still impaired, and they don't realize it because they feel better than they did when they decided to not drive. So their BAC might be lower if it's an alcohol OUI, but they're still impaired. So that's why we suggest calling a friend, getting a taxi if you're in a place like that, or just staying where you are. If you're at a friend's house, crash on the couch. And like Jamie said, the goal is to not have impaired drivers. It's not just to apprehend impaired drivers.
Excellent.
And we have a question on ours, and it's not really a question that pertains to impaired driving, but I think it may pertain to a checkpoint. But the question's from Elizabeth, and it says, what are the laws regarding open carry in a vehicle? And I think that may be important for them to announce to you at a checkpoint.
Yep. So they're required, if they don't have a permit in Maine for a firearm, to notify law enforcement they have one in the car. If they do have a concealed weapons permit, they're not required to. Obviously, it's cause for concern if we see it tucked between a seat and they haven't told us, but they're not required to tell us if they have.
We have some connection
broke it.
issues. All right.
We broke it.
Yep.
And some technical issues here with internet connections.
Yes. I'm not sure exactly what's going on with our connection. So we're going to wrap it up here. At any rate, we appreciate everyone who has asked questions to the feed. If you feel like we missed your question, feel free to message our page and we will try to respond to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much and have a great day.